The great archive of the galactic hegemony stretched for thousands of miles. Beneath the surface of Nexus Prime, it was the largest collection of knowledge in the known universe. Every species, every world, every war and peace treaty had its records stored in these endless halls. Millions of archivists spent their lives cataloging and protecting this information. Young Vrillanox was one of these archivists. He belonged to the Decian Collective, a species of tall and slender beings with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that could see in complete darkness. The Decians were known throughout the galaxy for their love of knowledge and their endless curiosity. Vrillanox had more curiosity than most. He had worked in the archive for 30 years, which was nothing for a Vesian who could live for 500. In that time, he had risen through the ranks until he was granted access to the deeper levels. Not the deepest, of course. Those were sealed by the Council of Elders and protected by security systems that could vaporize anyone who approached without authorization. But Vrillanox was clever. He had spent years studying the security protocols, learning their weaknesses, and waiting for his chance. That chance came on an ordinary morning when a power fluctuation caused a brief gap in the protective barriers. It lasted only 3 seconds. That was enough. He slipped through the gap and found himself in a corridor he had never seen before. The walls were made of a strange black metal that seemed to absorb light. The air was cold and still, as if no one had breathed it for thousands of years. Vrillanox felt fear creeping up his spine, but his curiosity was stronger. He walked forward. The corridor led to a single room. Inside, there was only one object, a crystal cube floating in the center, glowing with soft red light. Vrillanox approached it carefully. When he touched it, information flooded into his mind. Images, sounds, and data from a time before the hegemony existed. What he learned made him stumble backward in shock. The records spoke of a species called humans. They came from a small planet called Earth in a distant arm of the galaxy. The hegemony had classified them as a primitive species, locked away behind a quarantine zone that no one was allowed to enter. Every child in the galaxy learned that Earth was forbidden. The official reason was that humans were dangerous and unpredictable, not yet ready for contact with galactic civilization. But the crystal told a different story. Humans were not primitive. They were ancient. They were the oldest intelligent species in the universe, predating even the first stars. They had once wielded power that could reshape reality itself. They had fought wars across dimensions, broken the laws of physics, and burned galaxies as fuel for their weapons. They were not a species. They were gods of battle, living weapons of unimaginable destruction. And they had chosen to forget. The records explained that 12,000 years ago, humanity had voluntarily sealed away their power. They had rewritten their own minds, erasing their memories and reducing themselves to mortal creatures. They had done this because they were tired of war, tired of destruction, tired of being monsters that wanted to be something gentle, something kind, something human. The ancient species who survived humanity's last awakening had formed the galactic hegemony specifically to maintain this seal. The quarantine around Earth was not to protect the galaxy from primitive humans. It was to protect sleeping gods from being awakened. At the bottom of the records, Vrillanox found a warning written in every known language. Never speak the activation phrase to a human. Never remind them of what they were. The seal must not be broken. Below the warning was the activation phrase itself. Vrillanox stared at the words for a long time. His scientific mind rebelled against what he had learned. Gods' living weapons. Reality-warping power. It sounded like mythology, like the stories primitive species told to explain thunder and lightning. The hegemony was built on science and reason, not fairy tales. He convinced himself that the records were false. Perhaps they were a test of some kind, placed here to see if archivists would believe obvious nonsense. Perhaps they were ancient propaganda, designed to justify the quarantine around Earth for political reasons. There had to be a rational explanation. Vrillanox made a decision that would change the fate of the galaxy. He would go to Earth himself, but he would find these humans and prove that they were nothing special. He would speak the activation phrase and show that nothing would happen. Then he would return to the hegemony with evidence that the quarantine was unnecessary, and he would become the most famous archivist in history. It took him 3 months to prepare. He stole a small ship from the Vesian fleet, one equipped with stealth technology that could avoid the hegemony's sensors. He plotted a course through unmonitored space, careful to avoid any patrols. He practiced the activation phrase until he could say it perfectly. The journey to Earth took 2 weeks. As his ship approached the quarantine zone, Vrillanox felt a strange sensation. The space around Earth seemed different somehow, heavier, as if reality itself was thicker here, more solid, more real. He dismissed it as imagination and continued forward. Earth was a beautiful planet. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in the atmosphere. It looked peaceful and ordinary, nothing like the homeworld of galaxy-destroying gods. Vrillanox felt his confidence grow. He had been right. The records were lies. He landed his ship in a field of tall golden plants. Later he would learn they were called wheat. He chose this location because his scans showed a small settlement nearby, with only a few hundred humans. He wanted to make first contact quietly, without attracting too much attention. The first human he saw was working in the field. The creature was shorter than Relanox, with brown skin darkened by the sun and black hair streaked with gray. He was old, at least by human standards. He wore simple clothing and carried a tool for cutting plants. There was nothing godlike about him. He looked tired and ordinary. Relanox approached carefully, his translation device active. The human looked up and saw him. For a moment there was surprise on his face, then curiosity. He did not run or scream or attack. He simply waited, watching the alien approach. "Hello," Relanox said through his translator. "My name is I come from the stars." The human nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Not many blue fellas with 4 eyes around here." He smiled, showing white teeth. "Name's Thomas Chen. You lost or something?" Relanox almost laughed. This was the descendant of reality-warping gods. This simple farmer who joked with strange aliens. The records in the archive were definitely wrong. "I am not lost," Relanox said. "I came here specifically. I wanted to meet your people. I wanted to give you a message." Thomas Chen leaned on his cutting tool and raised an eyebrow. "A message from space. That's a new one. All right, let's hear it." Relanox spoke the activation phrase. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, nothing happened. Relanox felt relief flooding through him. He had been right. It was all just mythology and lies. He opened his mouth to speak again. Then he saw the change in Thomas Chen's eyes. The brown irises seemed to deepen, becoming darker and darker until they were black. But it was not the black of darkness. It was the black of space itself, filled with distant stars and swirling galaxies. Thomas Chen's eyes became windows to the universe. The human dropped his tool. His hands trembled. His mouth opened in a silent scream as something vast and ancient poured into his mind. He fell to his knees, clutching his head.
What?
Thomas gasped. "What is happening to me?" Relanox backed away in terror. He had been wrong. The records were true. He had just broken a seal that had held for 12,000 years. Thomas Chen remembered. He remembered being something more than human. He remembered holding stars in his hands and snuffing them out like candles. He remembered bending space with a thought, stepping between dimensions like walking through doors. He remembered the wars, the endless wars, the burning galaxies and dying civilizations. He remembered the enemy, the thing from beyond reality, the void collective that consumed everything it touched. He remembered choosing to forget. The memories were too much. 12,000 years of mortal existence could not prepare a mind for the weight of eternity. Thomas screamed, and his scream rippled across the planet. Every human on Earth felt something stir in their unconscious mind. Most dismissed it as a strange sensation, a momentary dizziness. But some felt more. Some began to remember. Relanox ran to his ship. His legs felt weak and his heart pounded with terror. He had made a terrible mistake. He had to warn the hegemony. He had to tell them what he had done. His ship lifted off from the wheat field and shot into the sky. As he broke through Earth's atmosphere, he looked back at the blue planet below. It looked the same as before, peaceful and ordinary. But Relanox knew that something had changed. The seal was broken. The sleeping gods were waking up. Behind him, in the wheat field, Thomas Chen slowly rose to his feet. The cosmic blackness faded from his eyes, leaving them brown again. But they were different now. There was depth in them, ancient and vast. He remembered everything, and somehow, he was still himself. He looked up at the sky, watching Relanox's ship disappear into the stars. He could have stopped it. He could have reached out with his newly remembered power and crushed it like an insect. But he did not. He was still Thomas Chen, a farm. The dreams came to every human on Earth. Some saw them as nightmares. They dreamed of fire consuming entire star systems, of worlds cracking open like eggs, of weapons that could tear holes in the fabric of reality. They woke up screaming and sweating, unable to understand why their minds were showing them such terrible things. Others saw them as memories. They dreamed of floating among the stars, of speaking in languages that predated the universe, of building and destroying on scales that made their mortal lives seem like the blink of an eye. These people woke up crying, mourning a greatness they had never known they had lost. Thomas Chen did not dream at all. He lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ancient power growing inside him like a second heartbeat. His wife Sarah slept beside him, unaware that her husband was no longer entirely human. He had not told her yet. He did not know how to explain that he was remembering how to break reality with his thoughts. 3 weeks had passed since Relanox spoke the activation phrase. In that time, the awakening had spread across the planet. It moved through the collective unconscious of humanity like ripples in a pond. Most people only felt small fragments, strange dreams and odd sensations. But a growing number were remembering more completely. Thomas had found 17 of them so far. They came to him without knowing why, drawn by something they could not explain. They gathered at his farm, sitting in his fields and talking quietly about what was happening to them. Some were terrified, some were excited, all were confused. A young woman named Maya had been the first to arrive. She was a teacher from California who had woken up one morning and accidentally set her apartment on fire with her mind. She had driven across the country without stopping, following an instinct that led her straight to Thomas. "Why you?" she had asked him on the first day. "Why do we all feel pulled toward you?" Thomas did not have an answer then, but as more awakened humans arrived, he began to understand. In the old times, before humanity had chosen to forget, he had been something like a leader, not a king or a commander, but something older and deeper. He had been the one who convinced humanity to seal away their power. He had been the architect of the forgetting. Now, as they remembered, they naturally turned to him again. The 17 awakened ones sat in a circle in Thomas's barn as the sun set outside. They ranged in age from 19 to 80. They came from different countries and spoke different languages, but they understood each other perfectly now. The old tongue was coming back to them, the language of gods that needed no translation. "The dreams are getting stronger," said Victor, an old man from Russia who had been a factory worker before the awakening. "Last night I remembered the war, the real war, the one against the Void." Several others nodded. They all knew what he meant. The Void Collective, the enemy from beyond reality, the thing that consumed everything it touched. They had fought it for billions of years. They had sacrificed more than any mortal mind could comprehend, and in the end, they had sealed it away, using their own diminished existence as the lock. "If we remember the war," said Maya quietly, "then we must also remember why we chose to forget." Thomas spoke for the first time. His voice was soft but carried weight that made everyone listen. "We forgot because we were tired. Tired of fighting, tired of destroying, tired of being weapons. We wanted to know what it felt like to be small, to be mortal, to live simple lives and die natural deaths." "Did we get what we wanted?" asked a young man named James, who had been a college student before the awakening. "Were we happy being human?" Thomas thought about his life, his childhood on a farm much like this one, his years in the army, serving in wars that seemed important at the time, his marriage to Sarah, the birth of his children, the quiet decades of farming and growing old. Had he been happy? "Yes," he said finally. "I was happy. I loved being human. I loved the smallness of it, the simplicity. I loved that things mattered because they could be lost." "But we can't go back," Maya said. "Can we? The seal is broken. We're waking up whether we want to or not." Before Thomas could answer, something changed in the air. All 17 awakened humans felt it at the same moment. It was like a vibration at the edge of perception, a silent alarm ringing in their minds. Something was approaching Earth at tremendous speed. Thomas closed his eyes and reached out with senses he was still learning to use. He saw the ships, hundreds of them, thousands, coming from every direction. They were hegemony vessels, armed with weapons designed to destroy planets, and leading them was a massive dreadnought flying the banner of the crashed Dominion. "They're coming to destroy us," Victor said grimly. "They know we're waking up, and they're going to try to kill us before we finish." "Can they?" James asked nervously. "Can they kill us now?" Thomas opened his eyes. "Some of us, yes. We're not fully awake yet. We're still partly mortal. Their weapons can hurt us, maybe kill us if we're not careful." "Then what do we do?" Maya demanded. "Hide, run, fight." Thomas stood up and walked to the barn door. He looked up at the darkening sky, knowing that beyond the blue atmosphere, death was coming for his species. He remembered the old times, when he had led humanity in wars that spanned galaxies. He remembered the power he had wielded, the enemies he had destroyed, the civilizations he had ended. He did not want to be that being again, but he also would not let his people die. "I'll go," he said. "I'll meet them alone. I'll try to make them understand." "They won't listen," Victor said. "The Kresh are warriors. They only understand strength." "Then I'll show them strength without using it to destroy." Thomas turned to face the others. "Stay here. Protect each other. If I fail, you'll need to decide what humanity becomes next." He walked out of the barn before anyone could argue. Sarah was standing on the porch of the house, watching him with worried eyes. She had known something was wrong for weeks. He had not told her the truth, but she had felt it somehow. "Where are you going?" she asked. Thomas crossed the yard and took her hands. He looked into her eyes, the eyes of the woman he had loved for 40 years, and he told her the truth. "I'm going to save the world," he said. "Maybe the galaxy, I'm not sure yet." Sarah did not ask for explanations. She had always trusted him, even when she did not understand. "Will you come back?" "I hope so." He kissed her forehead, and then he rose into the sky. It felt natural, like remembering how to ride a bicycle. His body lifted from the ground, and he accelerated upward through the atmosphere. The air grew thin and cold, then disappeared entirely. He found himself floating in the darkness of space, looking down at the blue marble of Earth below. The fleet was closer now. He could see the ships with eyes that no longer needed light to function. Thousands of warships, bristling with weapons, carrying soldiers who had been told that humanity was a threat to all life in the galaxy. They were afraid, Thomas realized. They were attacking out of fear. He flew toward them, a single human figure against the vast armada. As he approached, he felt their sensors locking onto him. He felt the weapons charging, ready to fire. He felt the confusion of the crews as they tried to understand what they were seeing. A single human, floating in space, completely unprotected, approaching their fleet as casually as a man walking through a park. The Kresh commander ordered a halt. The fleet stopped, weapons still aimed at Thomas but not firing. A communication channel opened, and a harsh voice spoke in a language that Thomas understood perfectly. Human creature, you are in violation of hegemony law. Your species has been awakened in defiance of the Codex of Silence. Surrender immediately, or you will be destroyed. Thomas floated calmly before the massive dreadnought. He could see the creche inside, reptilian beings covered in scales and armor. They were fierce warriors, proud and quick to anger. They had never lost a war in their history. I am Thomas Chen, he said, his voice carrying through space by means that had nothing to do with sound waves. I represent awakening humanity. We do not wish to fight. We only want to be left in peace. The creche commander laughed, a rasping sound like stones grinding together. Peace, you are battle gods, weapons of mass destruction. Your kind cannot be left in peace. You must be destroyed before you destroy us. We are more than weapons, Thomas said. We chose to become human because we were tired of destruction. We can choose to remain peaceful, even with our power restored. Lies all species with power use it. It is the nature of the universe. The strong consume the weak. You will be no different. Thomas sighed. He had hoped for reason, but he had expected this. The creche understood only strength, so he would show them strength in a way they had never imagined. He did not attack. He did not threaten. He simply looked at the fleet with eyes that saw more than light. He reached into the minds of every creche soldier, every crew member, every commander. He showed them something. He showed them what would happen if they fired in a single instant. Thousands of creche experienced their own deaths. They saw every possible future where they attacked Earth, and in every future they died. They saw themselves torn apart at the atomic level. They saw their ships twisted into impossible shapes. They saw their families, their homeworld, their entire civilization erased from existence as if it had never been. They did not see Thomas doing this. They saw other humans, millions of awakening battle gods, responding to the attack on their homeworld with the fury of 3 months after the creche fleet fled from Earth. The galaxy was in chaos. The galactic hegemony had maintained peace for 12,000 years through a careful balance of power, diplomacy, and fear. Now that balance was shattered. News of humanity's awakening spread to every corner of known space. Every species, every civilization, every government had to decide how to respond to the return of the battle gods. Some wanted war. The creche Dominion, humiliated by their defeat, called for a united assault on Earth. They argued that humanity must be destroyed before they fully awakened. They showed recordings of Thomas Chen floating alone in space, demonstrating power beyond anything the galaxy had seen in millennia. This is only the beginning, the creche warned. Imagine what they will do when they are fully awake. Others wanted peace. The Vessian Collective, desperate to hide Verlanox's role in the awakening, pushed for diplomatic contact. They argued that humanity had been peaceful for 12,000 years and might remain peaceful now. They chose to forget their power. The Deshens pointed out, perhaps they will choose to use it responsibly. The elder species, those ancient civilizations that remembered humanity's last awakening, said nothing. They retreated to their hidden worlds and sealed their borders. They knew something the younger races did not understand. War with humanity was not a strategy. It was extinction. On Earth, the awakening continued. Thomas Chen had become the unofficial leader of the awakened, a role he did not want but could not escape. His farm in Iowa had become a gathering place for those who remembered their true nature. Hundreds came at first, then thousands. They pitched tents in his fields and built shelters in his woods. They came seeking guidance, seeking answers, seeking someone who could help them understand what they were becoming. Not everyone welcomed the change. Most of humanity still slept, their minds touched by strange dreams but not fully awakened. These ordinary humans looked at the growing camp in Iowa with fear and suspicion. The American government sent soldiers to surround the area. Other nations made threatening statements. The world was afraid of its own people. Thomas tried to ease these fears. He gave interviews to news cameras, explaining that the awakened did not want conflict. He demonstrated his power in small, harmless ways, showing that it could be controlled. He promised that humanity would not become the monsters the galaxy feared, but not all the awakened agreed with his approach. A man named Marcus had arrived at the camp 3 weeks ago. He was young, barely 30, and he had awakened more completely than almost anyone except Thomas himself. His eyes carried the black depths of cosmic power constantly now, not just in moments of stress. He remembered the old times vividly, remembered the glory and the strength and the absolute dominion humanity had held over all existence. He did not want to be a farmer who happened to have godlike power. He wanted to be a god. "We are wasting ourselves," Marcus said at a gathering of the awakened. Thousands sat in a natural amphitheater that had not existed a week ago. Some of them had created it with a thought, reshaping the land to suit their needs. "We have power beyond imagination, and we use it to grow crops and give speeches. We bow and scrape to aliens who try to destroy us." Thomas stood on the other side of the amphitheater, feeling the dangerous energy in Marcus's words. "We show restraint because we remember what we were. We know what power without wisdom does. We were not mad destroyers," Marcus shot back. "We were warriors fighting a real enemy. The Void Collective threatened everything. We did what was necessary, and we burned galaxies in the process. We killed trillions of innocent beings. We became so lost in war that we forgot how to be anything else. Thomas's voice carried the weight of ancient memory. That is why we chose to forget. That is why we became human. Marcus laughed bitterly. And what did being human give us? Short lives, weak bodies, minds that forget more than they remember. We traded godhood for mortality, and now we cannot even protect ourselves. The hegemony sends fleet after fleet. They will never stop trying to destroy us. We must strike first. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Thomas felt his heart sink. Marcus was touching something real, a fear that lived in all of them. The galaxy did not want them to exist. How long could they keep turning the other cheek? If we strike first, Thomas said slowly, we become what they fear. We prove that they were right to try to destroy us, and we lose any chance of peace. Peace is for the weak, Marcus declared. Power is truth. We are the most powerful beings in existence. Why should we pretend otherwise? Before Thomas could respond, something changed. Every awakened human felt it simultaneously, a ripple of wrongness spreading across reality. It was different from the Crash fleet, different from any threat they had faced so far. It was older, darker. It was something they remembered from before the forgetting. Thomas looked up at the clear blue sky, but his eyes saw beyond it. He saw through the fabric of space itself, to the distant edge of the galaxy where something was happening, something terrible. The Void, he whispered. The word spread through the crowd like wildfire. The Void Collective. The enemy they had sealed away 12,000 years ago. The thing they had fought for billions of years before finally choosing to forget it was waking up. Thomas reached out with his mind, spanning the vast distance between Earth and the galaxy's edge. He saw a star system, once home to billions of beings, being consumed. The Void Collective was a darkness that defied description, a hunger that existed outside normal reality. It did not destroy in the usual sense. It consumed, absorbed, and made things part of itself. Matter, energy, life, thought, all of it became void, and it was spreading. The seal, Thomas said, his voice carrying to every awakened human on Earth. When we chose to forget, we used ourselves as the lock. Our mortal existence held the void in its prison. Now that we're awakening, the lock is weakening. Then we must fully awaken, Marcus said fiercely. We must become what we were and destroy the void once and for all. It is not that simple. Thomas turned to face the crowd. I remember now. I remember why we did not destroy the void in the old times. We could not. It exists outside normal reality. Every time we fought it, we only made it stronger. Our power fed it. Our weapons gave it more to consume. Then, how did we seal it? Someone asked. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the ancient memories surface. We diminished ourselves. We became mortal. We created a lock that was not made of power but of its absence. The void could not consume what was barely there. It could not break a seal made of weakness rather than strength. The implication hung heavy in the air. To seal the void again, they would have to become mortal again. They would have to choose to forget once more. No, Marcus said flatly. I will not return to that prison. I will not pretend to be small when I am infinite. Then what? Thomas demanded. The void will spread. It will consume the galaxy, then the universe. Everything will become nothing. Is that what you want? I want there to be another way. Thomas wished he could offer one. He searched his memories. Billions of years of knowledge slowly returning to his consciousness. The Void Collective had been humanity's greatest enemy. They had fought it longer than stars had burned. Every strategy, every weapon, every approach had been tried. Nothing had worked except the final sacrifice, the forgetting. But they were not fully awake now. There was something in between, mortal and immortal, human and God. Perhaps there was a way to use that before he could explore the thought. Communication signals flooded into his awareness. The hegemony was calling. All channels, all frequencies. A desperate plea broadcast across the galaxy. The void has consumed 3 star systems. Our weapons are useless. Our shields are worthless. We have nothing that can stop it. The voice belonged to the Speaker of the Council, a being called Arxes who led the hegemony. We are calling upon humanity. We know what you are. We know what you are. We are asking you to save us. Thomas felt the irony keenly. 3 months ago, the hegemony had sent a fleet to destroy them. Now they begged for help. They tried to kill us, Marcus said coldly. Let them die. There are trillions of innocent beings in the galaxy, Thomas replied. Children who never voted for war. Farmers like I was, just trying to live their lives. Do they deserve to die because their leaders made bad choices? Marcus did not answer, but his expression said everything. Thomas made a decision. I am going to the hegemony. I am going to see the void for myself. I am going to find a way to stop it without fully awakening or fully forgetting. That is impossible, said an old woman named Elena, one of the most awakened among them. The old records are clear. There is no middle path. The old records were written by beings who were fully awake, Thomas said. We are something new. We are still partly human. Maybe that gives us options they never had. He rose into the air, ready to fly across the galaxy to face an enemy from before time. Before he left, he looked down at Marcus. While I am gone, remember what we chose to become. Remember why we loved being human. If I fail, you will have to decide what humanity does next. Choose wisely. Marcus said nothing, but his eyes burned with barely contained power. Thomas Chen floated at the edge of destruction. Before him, the Void Collective consumed everything it touched. It was not simply dark. It was the absence of everything, a hunger given form, a wound in reality that could never be healed. He watched as a planet twice the size of Earth was slowly absorbed into the blackness. Mountains, oceans, cities filled with billions of beings, all of it drawn into the void like water down a drain. No screams escaped. No light, nothing. Behind him, the combined fleet of the Galactic Hegemony waited at what they hoped was a safe distance. 1,000 warships from 100 different species, all of them helpless against the enemy they faced. Their weapons had proven useless. Their shields might as well have been made of paper. They had come because they had no other choice. And they stayed because running would only delay the inevitable. Thomas felt the void reaching toward him. It sensed his awakening power, and it was hungry. It remembered him from before, from the wars that had lasted billions of years. It remembered the taste of battle gods, the sweetest feast it had ever known. You cannot defeat me, the void spoke, though it had no voice. The words formed directly in Thomas's mind, cold and absolute. I am eternal. I am inevitable. I am the end of all things. I remember you, Thomas replied. I remember fighting you. I remember losing so many of my kind to your hunger, and you will join them. You are already less than you were. I can feel the mortality in you, the weakness. You chose to become prey. Thomas did not argue. The void was right. He was not the battle god he had been 12,000 years ago. He was something in between, still partly human, still capable of dying. Against the full power of the Void Collective, he would not last long. But he had not come to fight. He had come to understand. Thomas closed his eyes and reached into his oldest memories, before the forgetting, before the sealing. There had been a time when humanity had sought to understand the void rather than simply destroy it. They had failed, but they had learned something important. The void was not evil. It did not hate or want to cause suffering. It simply hungered. It consumed because that was its nature. Just as fire burned and water flowed, the question was whether there was anything that could satisfy that hunger without destroying everything. Thomas opened his eyes and looked at the void with new understanding. You are not our enemy, he said slowly. You are a force of nature. We made you our enemy because we could not think of any other way to respond to you. Your understanding does not change anything. I will consume this galaxy and all the others. I will consume until there is nothing left to consume. That is what I am. But why? Thomas pressed. What drives your hunger? What created you in the first place? The void was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was something almost like confusion in its words. I do not know. I have always existed. I have always hungered. These questions are meaningless. Thomas felt something shift inside him. A memory, older than any he had accessed before, surfaced from the depths of his awakening mind. It showed him the beginning, the true beginning. Before humanity had become battle gods, before the void had been their enemy, they had created it. The memory was fragmented, incomplete, but the truth was clear. In humanity's earliest days as cosmic beings, they had experimented with forces beyond their understanding. They had tried to create an engine of unlimited power, something that could fuel their ascension to true godhood. Instead, they had created a wound in reality, a hunger that could never be filled. The Void Collective was their mistake, their responsibility. That was why they had fought it for so long. That was why they could never truly destroy it. The void was part of them. It was made from their power, twisted into something terrible. That meant they could unmake it. I know what you are now, Thomas said. You are our shadow, our hunger made manifest. We created you, and we are responsible for you. The void recoiled slightly. You lie. I was not created. I have always been. Your memories only go back so far because that is when we made you. You are not separate from us. You are a piece of us that we lost control of. Thomas moved closer to the consuming darkness. And that means we can take you back. Before the void could respond, Thomas reached out with his awakening power, not to attack, not to seal, but to connect. He touched the edge of the darkness and let it flow into him. Pain beyond description flooded his being. The hunger of the void was vast and terrible, an emptiness that had grown for billions of years. It wanted to consume him, to add his power to its infinite appetite. But Thomas did not resist. He accepted you're alone, he said to the void. You have always been alone. That is why you hunger. You were separated from us, and you have been trying to return ever since. The void trembled. Something in Thomas's words touched something in its nature. The hunger was not just for matter and energy. It was for connection, for belonging, for the wholeness it had lost when it was torn away from humanity. We can end this, Thomas said. Not by destroying you or sealing you, by taking you back, by making you part of us again. If I return to you, I will consume you. My hunger is too great. You cannot contain it. Not alone. But we are not alone. Thomas reached out across the galaxy, across the light years between him and Earth. He touched the minds of every awakened human, sharing his memory and his understanding. We made this mistake together. We must fix it together. On Earth the awakened felt his call. They felt his plan, risky and uncertain but offering something the old ways never had, a true end to the ancient enemy. Most of them joined him immediately, adding their power to his, creating a network of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. Marcus hesitated. He felt the plan, understood what Thomas was asking. It would require giving up part of their power permanently. The void's hunger would become part of them forever, a weight they would carry for eternity. They would never be the pure battle gods they had been before, but they had already chosen to give up that purity when they became human. They had chosen weakness and mortality in simple lives. Taking back the void was just another version of the same choice. Marcus added his power to the network. The hegemony fleet watched in awe as something impossible happened. The Void Collective, the terror of the galaxy, the consumer of worlds, began to shrink. It was not being destroyed or sealed. It was being absorbed, drawn into the combined consciousness of awakening humanity. Thomas felt the hunger entering him and his people. It was terrible and vast and threatened to overwhelm them. But they were not fighting it anymore. They were accepting it, making it part of themselves, transforming it from a wound into a scar. The process took hours. Star systems that had been partially consumed were left as damaged remnants, forever marked by what had happened. The beings who had been absorbed were gone forever, beyond any power to restore. But the spreading destruction stopped. When it was over, the Void Collective was gone. In its place was something new, something that had never existed before. Humanity was still awakening, still caught between mortality and godhood, but now they carried within them the hunger that had once threatened all existence. It was a weight, a burden, a constant reminder of what uncontrolled power could create. Thomas floated alone in space where the void had been. He felt different now, heavier. The hunger was inside him, and it would be inside him forever. It whispered constantly, wanting to consume, wanting to grow. He would spend eternity keeping it in check, but he was still human enough to feel relief. The enemy was not destroyed but transformed. The mistake was not undone but accepted. That was more than anyone could have hoped for. The speaker of the Hegemony Council sent a message across all channels. Humanity has saved the galaxy. The Void Collective is no more. We owe them a debt that can never be repaid. Thomas laughed bitterly. A few months ago, they had tried to destroy humanity. Now they called them saviors. Politics never changed. Even on a galactic scale, he flew back toward Earth, feeling the other awakened humans processing what had happened. They had all changed, all grown heavier with the weight of absorbed hunger. Some were struggling with it, fighting against the constant whisper to consume. Others were accepting it more easily, finding ways to live with the new presence inside them. Marcus was waiting when Thomas landed in Iowa. His eyes were different now, deeper and darker, carrying the weight of the void they had all absorbed. "You were right," Marcus said quietly. "There was another way. I should have trusted you." Thomas shook his head. "I was not right. I was just desperate enough to try something new. It could have gone badly. It almost did, but it did not. And now we are something that has never existed before. Not fully gods, not fully human, something in between." Thomas looked around at the gathering awakened, at the ordinary humans watching from the edges of the camp, at the sky filled with stars that now seemed much more fragile than they had before. "Maybe that is what we were always meant to be," he said. "Not destroyers or victims, if just beings trying to do our best with what we have." Sarah was waiting on the porch of their farmhouse. She looked older than she had 3 months ago, worn by worry and uncertainty, but she smiled when she saw him, and that smile made everything worth it. "Is it over?" she asked. Thomas took her hand. "The void is gone, but we carry part of it now. It will never really be over. Can you live with that?" He thought about the hunger incident year had passed since humanity absorbed the void. Collective, the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality. The galactic hegemony had formally ended the quarantine around Earth and invited humanity to join as full members. Some species welcomed them with open arms, grateful for salvation from the void. Others watched from a distance, were still afraid of what the battle gods might become. On Earth, life was slowly returning to normal, though normal had taken on a new meaning. Thomas Chen stood in his wheat field, watching the golden stalks bend in the autumn wind. The harvest had been good this year, better than any he could remember. Perhaps his awakened senses had helped him know exactly when to plant, when to water, when to let the sun do its work. Or perhaps it was just luck. He preferred to believe it was luck. Sarah worked beside him, as she had for 40 years. Her hair was fully gray now, and her movements were slower than they used to be. She was mortal still, aging as all humans did. Thomas knew that he would outlive her by eons, that watching her die would break something inside him that could never be repaired. But that was the choice he had made. To be human was to lose things. To love was to accept that loss was inevitable. The alternative, eternal detachment from mortal concerns, seemed far worse. "You are thinking too hard again," Sarah said, not looking up from her work. "I can feel it." Thomas smiled. She could not read minds, but after 4 decades together, she did not need to. "I am thinking about how grateful I am for this farm, for this life, for you, sentimental fool." But she was smiling too. The camp of awakened humans had mostly dispersed. Some had returned to their old lives, trying to be ordinary people with extraordinary abilities. Others had joined the newly formed Council of the Awakened, group that worked with the hegemony to address threats to galactic peace. A few had left Earth entirely, exploring the cosmos with senses that could span light years. Marcus was one of those explorers. He had changed in the years since absorbing the void. The hunger inside him was strong, stronger than most, and he found it easier to bear when surrounded by the vast emptiness of space. He sent messages to Thomas occasionally, describing wonders that no human eyes had seen before. He was not the angry young man who had wanted to become a conquering god. He had found purpose in discovery rather than domination. The hegemony had learned to accept humanity's presence. It helped that the awakened had been careful, even humble, in their dealings with other species. They did not demand power or territory. They did not threaten or intimidate. They simply existed, powerful beyond measure, but choosing not to use that power for conquest. Some species found this harder to understand than aggression would have been. Power without ambition confused them. Strength without cruelty seemed unnatural. But gradually, they were learning that humanity was something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. Relenox, the archivist who had started everything, had been brought before the Hegemony Council for judgment. The elder species wanted him executed for breaking the seal. The Thessian collective wanted to claim he had acted without authorization and was mentally unstable. Thomas had spoken at the trial. He made a mistake, Thomas had said, his voice carrying to every corner of the great council chamber. A foolish, dangerous mistake born of curiosity and arrogance. But his mistake led to something important. It led to us waking up in a way that let us choose what to become. If we had been awakened differently, by attack or invasion, we might have become the destroyers everyone feared. Instead, we had time to remember why we chose humanity in the first place. The council had debated for weeks. In the end, Relenox was exiled to a remote world, stripped of his rank and forbidden from accessing any archive ever again. It was a harsh punishment, but far gentler than what some had demanded. Thomas had visited him once. On that distant exile world, the Thessian had aged badly. His blue skin faded to gray, his 4 eyes dim with despair. "Why did you speak for me?" Relenox had asked. "I nearly destroyed everything." Thomas had considered the question carefully. Because destruction was only one possible outcome. The outcome we actually got was something better. "You were wrong about many things, but you were right that the old way, keeping us asleep forever, was not sustainable. Eventually, someone would have broken the seal. At least this way it happened when we still had room to grow." "I do not understand you," Relenox had said. "You have the power of gods, and you choose to be a farmer. You could rule the galaxy, and you choose to speak at trials for those who wronged you. What do you want?" Thomas had smiled at that. "I want what I have always wanted. A simple life. A loving family. Work that means something. The power is just a burden I carry while pursuing those things." He left Relenox to his exile, knowing the archivist would never truly understand. That was fine. Understanding was not necessary for coexistence. Now, standing in his field a year later, Thomas felt the weight of the void's hunger inside him. It was always there, whispering, wanting. He had learned to live with it the way a person learns to live with chronic pain. It did not control him. It was simply part of him. The other awakened had found their own ways of coping. Elena, the old woman who had been among the first to remember, had started teaching young awakened how to control their abilities. Her school on the Greek island of Crete had become famous throughout the galaxy, drawing visitors who wanted to understand how beings of such power could choose restraint. Maya, the teacher who had accidentally set her apartment on fire, now worked with the hegemony as a diplomatic envoy. Her ability to understand and communicate with any species made her invaluable in negotiations. She had helped prevent 3 wars in the past year alone, and James, the college student who had been so frightened by his awakening, had become a healer. His power could repair bodies at the cellular level, cure diseases that had plagued species for millennia. He traveled constantly, never staying long in one place, helping wherever he was needed. They were all changed, all marked by what they had become, but they were still recognizably human, still connected to the mortal world they had chosen so long ago. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Thomas and Sarah finished their work and walked back toward the farmhouse. Their children were coming for dinner. 3 generations gathering around a table that had hosted meals for 40 years. Thomas paused at the edge of the field and looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, trillions of beings went about their lives, many of them still afraid of what humanity might become. Somewhere out there, Marcus explored wonders beyond imagination. Somewhere out there, the scars left by the void were slowly healing, and here, on this small blue planet, a farmer who remembered being a god was going home for dinner with his family. "Coming," Sarah called from the porch. "Coming," Thomas said. He took one last look at the stars, feeling his connection to every awakened human across the galaxy. They were all still there, still struggling with their power, still choosing to be something gentle in a universe that often rewarded cruelty. They were the battle gods who had chosen peace, the weapons who had become healers, The destroyers who had learned to build, they were human. And that, Thomas thought as he walked into the warm light of his home, what's the best thing they could possibly be. Inside, his grandchildren were arguing about something trivial. His daughter was helping Sarah set the table. His son was telling a joke that made everyone groan. It was ordinary and chaotic and perfect. Thomas Chen, the farmer who could unmake galaxies, sat down at his table and gave thanks for his simple life. The universe stretched infinite and dangerous beyond the walls of his farmhouse. Threats would come, challenges would arise. Humanity would be tested again and again in the millennia ahead. But for now, there was dinner with family. There was love and laughter and the small joys that made existence worth living. There was humanity, awake and aware and choosing kindness. In the end, that was all that mattered. The galaxy had feared what humanity would do when they awakened. They had imagined conquest and destruction and the return of ancient horrors. Instead, they got farmers and healers and teachers. They got beings of infinite power who cared about small things. They got gods who had chosen to be human, and the universe was better for it. Far away, on his exile world, Vrlonix looked up at the stars and finally understood. He had sought to prove that humanity was nothing special, just another primitive species exaggerated by myth. Instead, he had proven something far more important. The greatest power in the universe was not the ability to destroy. It was the ability to choose not to. Humanity had that power, and they used it every single day. The seal was broken, the battle gods were awake, and they had chosen to be kind. That was the real story. Not war, not conquest, not fear. Just kindness practiced eternally by beings who could have chosen anything in the wheat field. The wind continued to blow, and the stars continued to shine. And somewhere a farmer laughed at a joke his grandchild had told. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.